Okay, for today's exercise, all you need is a pencil and a piece of paper in the very least. It would make sense also to have a ruler and maybe some sort of object that has a hard edge on it. You could use a popsicle stick, you could use a pop can or something like that. If you want to trace along the edge of it, anything that has a hard edge on it is good for tracing. So go ahead and get those supplies, and then we're going to dive into line. Line, simply put, is a mark that is longer than it is wide. And so what I've done is created several lines here to make a grid. And in this grid, we're going to fill it up with a whole bunch of different types of line. So line has lots of different properties. And we're going to start out with some of the directional lines. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to make patterns from those different lines. Because when you start repeating lines, you can create interesting effects. And in order to do that, we're going to start out with a couple of different lines. So the first line that we're going to talk about is vertical. Vertical lines simply go up and down, right? So if you look at these lines here, vertical lines are going straight up. Horizontal lines, think about the horizon and a beautiful sunset. If I can spell it right, Horizon. Horizontal lines go along the horizon. So horizontal are the next lines that we're going to look at. After that, we've got lines that kind of are neither vertical nor horizontal. They're the lines that go at an angle, and those would be diagonal lines. Then there are lines that go all over the place, sort of like this N right here. Those are more Zig Zag lines. And then, of course, there are lines that are smooth and rounded, and we can call those curved lines. Now, there's probably lots of different other categories that you could come up with, but these are 5 of them just to get you going on this exercise. So what you should be thinking about is for this particular exercise is trying to make lines that represent each one of these words, right? So vertical are going to be up and down lines. Now within those lines, we're going to start out really simply, and on this one I'm just going to make lines that go straight up and down. All right, so horizontal lines would be the next one. Basically what you're going to do before I move on is you're going to think about each one of these can be a different example. You certainly do not need to follow mine. I've just given you one just for a basic starting point. But think about what kind of horizontal lines you can do. I would suggest using a ruler, and for this one, a really sharp pencil so that you can create really precise lines. Okay. Now for the next one, I'm going to vary it up just a little bit. Instead of just having completely thin lines that are all going in the same direction, I'm going to change it just a little bit. So you can see that they don't necessarily need to stay straight to be considered a line. Okay, now you can see something here that you might be thinking is that these lines are not just horizontal, they're also a little bit curved. Totally fine. It's totally fine. Okay, that's the great thing about art. So there's no real one way to do things, right? So think of each one of these squares as a different problem to solve, and that problem is that in this case all of those lines need to stay horizontal. So with this, within each one of these squares, there is a chance for you to solve it a different way. Okay, so as we move on to diagonal, we're going to take another attempt at a different way of creating lines. Okay, so now diagonal is going to go from basically corner to corner or up at an angle, and really it can go either way or both ways. You know, there's, like I said, not one way to do it. Diagonal. So again, some of the properties that you can see in this one that are a little bit different, instead of just solid lines, which I started out with, they can be dotted or they can be broken up. They can also go in different directions. And one of the best things that you can do is make some variations in those repetitions. It just creates different visual interest, right? So, you know, using a really skinny pencil lead like you do on a mechanical pencil, there are some different options to make it contrast with the other lines. So in this case, I thickened one of those dotted lines up, and it just creates a little bit of a variation in there. Now, if I wanted to spend some time, I could even develop that a little bit more and thicken up some of the other diagonal dotted lines. All right, let's move on to zigzag. So zigzag lines, if you think of lightning, zigzag lines are kind of like that. Sometimes they can be very precise, like on a 5-pointed star, or you know, it doesn't have to even be 5 points. It could be any pointed star, or it could be very random, like in lightning, or it could be both as well, coming from maybe lightning with or a star with lightning coming out of it. Again, it's up to you how you want to do it. All right, there is an example. And honestly, if you want to be a little bit more precise, you can use a ruler to do those zigzag lines. It always might make it look a little bit neater. But one point I want to make here is that sometimes those lines lead the eye. So if you have a point that you want to focus on, you can take that line and bring the eye to the point simply by directing the eye to that area that you want to look. Those are called leading lines. Especially in photography, that's a really common use, is to look for lines in your composition so that you can direct the viewer to the subject matter. So in this case, all of those lines kind of point directly toward the center. All right, let's move on to curved lines. Okay, here's some curved lines. In this case, we've got a whole bunch of ghosts coming out from the background. Those lines that overlap can indicate depth, which is another way to be thinking about where you put your lines down and why that matters. So here are 5 simple ways to draw lines, and I would suggest, again, using some sort of support as you're drawing, whether that's even a popsicle stick or a ruler, or something with a hard edge on it, just to draw really precise lines. Take your time and fill up. You know, in this case, I've got 25 squares, so each one is going to have a different variation in it, and that will give you guys just a little bit of exercise. That will give you a little bit of practice with line. Enjoy.